it was really 2020 for me when it clicked about Bitcoin, and it clicked because I actually put some effort in. The fact that you would need inflation to run and to drive spending in an economy is basically saying we need to steal from you every year to make sure that you spend. Y- our taught experience of money printing doesn't align with today because it's just not visible. And so Bitcoin is just energy money. It's absolutely backed by something. It's backed by energy. It's the purest, highest quality form of money we've ever had, and it's fixed in supply. Bitcoiners are very optimistic for the future, but specifically, the biggest lie of all is
Hey Joe, welcome to the Bitcoin IFA podcast.
pleasure to be here. Thank you for bringing me on to this brand new podcast.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. I wanted to thank you for being one of the launch episodes.
Great, honored to be on the shortlist. So thanks.
Okay, so Joe, you released a video. Let's jump straight in. You released a video a few months ago now. You've had a bit of a whirlwind few months with What's the Problem, which is, I've said this a couple of times on social media, but I say it again on here without exaggeration or hyperbole. I think it's one of the most important videos anyone will ever watch. There will always be a link to it in our show notes. And it's obviously something that we're going to touch on. But before we get into that, you've had a fascinating career, Goldman Sachs, and then onto Superbet. So if anyone is really qualified to speak to financial advisors about what the problem is and about Bitcoin, it's definitely you. And before we dive into that, what I want to dig into is everyone, and I mean everyone, is against Bitcoin until they're for it. So what's your Bitcoin story?
Well, exactly that. I mean, it's true. It's true of probably absolutely everybody, apart from a very small handful of the original recipients of the white paper. I think. Um, I mean, it was really 2020 for me when it clicked about Bitcoin, and it clicked because I actually put some effort in. And what tends to happen is it doesn't click until you put a little bit of effort in. Because if you think about if you evaluate Bitcoin through the lens of what other people tell you about Bitcoin, you're not going to be for it in general, unless you have somebody who actually understands sufficient amounts about Bitcoin and they can tell you from solid foundations. If you are watching the BBC or you're reading any mainstream or even not mainstream, um, news articles, things like that, all you'll see is the bad stuff, and the bad stuff is not even correct. It's not even correct, and so it takes a certain amount of effort to sort of dispel those myths or incorrect framings which you have as default. That's getting easier now over time, but I'd fallen into that trap a number of times really before 2020. I first came across it probably in 2012, 2013, and I was still working in finance on the trading desk, and one of the young lads was just mining Bitcoin on his PC at home, and I thought, yeah, that's interesting. I'd look at the white paper, but at that point in time, I had no mental space for engaging with it. It was, head down, young family, mortgage, just trying to get through the day because I was doing something I really didn't enjoy, and so not in a receptive place from a number of angles to really engage with it. I wasn't necessarily negative on it at that point because it was almost pre any media stuff, 3 years after launch. And then again, probably 15, 16, when my brother came to me And for context here, Dan, my my brother and I are very similar in some ways, very different in others. He's an actor and he does solo plays, writes, produces, acts, solo plays, and extremely talented. But I was working in the financial industry, and when my brother, who's an actor, comes to me and says, this thing's gonna it's gonna make the financial industry redundant. Yeah. It's like me going to him and telling him, I've discovered this new thing about acting and it's gonna change the way that your world works. It would probably have been met with the same response because you assume that area of expertise. And so and then from 15, 16, you really start to see the growth of the negative Bitcoin press, etc., etc. And I didn't really pay much attention to that, but you sort of naturally absorb it because you hear it, etc., etc. And it's only when you put that little bit of work in, you realize it's absolute garbage. And quite often it's 180 degrees wrong. It's not just a little bit wrong, it's actually the opposite. And so you'll see on TV, Bitcoin is causing an energy crisis, it's destroying the planet, all of these things. You could not be more wrong. You could not be wrong. It's actually the solution to the energy crisis. It is the way out for us, if from an environmental destruction perspective, just generally. You know, but you could not be more wrong. But unless you put the work in, you start in completely the wrong direction. And so it was only in 2020 that with COVID, I actually had some space to start doing that work.
I don't think that's uncommon.
Yeah.
We've had similar journeys. I was working in advertising and marketing in a job I hated, wasn't receptive. Receptive's a great word for it, having that space to be curious. And yeah, same as you, 2012, 2013, 2017, massive bull run. 2019, I was investing in a company, and the friend that I was investing with told me to take some of the money and put it into Bitcoin. And I was just dismissive. I had made up the story in my mind that governments would never allow it. Having not done a minute's research, I just said, this is too disruptive. They will never allow it.
Yeah, well, it's either government won't allow it, it's a Ponzi scheme not backed by anything, it's destroying the planet, so I don't like it on educational grounds. The red team or the blue team says this is bad, therefore I think it's bad. All I hear in the media is it's bad. We just need to zoom out, engage some critical thinking, and increasing amounts of people are getting to the point of distrust with the official narratives because they're constantly shown to be lies, lies about almost everything. And so, as more and more people wake up to to, to those lies, I was thinking about describing it a slightly different way, but to those lies, it means you start to just think much more critically about everything, and especially people within finance and those from a technical background that think in terms of systems, logic, cause and effect, establishing value, less creative in a sort of left brain versus right brain type of background, but they become the natural early adopters of this because once you do spend a little bit of time working, a little bit of time trying to understand it, it will click, and you'll go through this. Oh my, oh my word phase. You think, I wish I'd known this sooner, but it's still relatively inaccessible for large swathes of the population. But I think, the people who would be listening to this are probably right in that sweet spot for level of critical thinking, um, focus, in motivation.
Hopefully,
Oh,
hopefully.
I hope so.
um, there is a number of things that you've just said that I wanted to touch on. I'm going to give you my real world lived experience. So the penny dropping moment for me was living in Lebanon. Bought $1,000 worth of Lebanese lira at 5,000 to the dollar. And within 3 days, that had gone to 8,000 to the dollar. So my $1,000 that I'd bought expecting to last a couple of months suddenly dropped to 40% in value in the blink of an eye, days.
You're probably the only one going that direction in the trade. Everyone else is like, "What? This guy,
What?
this guy wants to give up dollars to get Lebanese lira. What's going on?"
It was exactly like that. Someone literally said to me, "Do not buy $1,000 worth," and I was like, "No, no, no, it'll be fine." Like literally a Lebanese person has lived through that experience already for a year was telling me, "Don't do this," and I, being stubborn and British and never had any issues with the financial rails, I was like, "It will be fine. I'll just buy $1,000 worth. I only want to do this once."
Well, the money's melting, Dan, and the difference is our money is melting. The pound is melting. The dollar is melting. The Lebanese lira was on fire, right? But it's all relative. Like people in Lebanon, they want dollars because it's not on fire. It's still melting, just not as fast. That's it. But when we're sat in the UK or the US or Europe, for example, our money's still melting, but we feel the melting. Some of us, well, we all feel the melting. Some of us realize we can actually do something about it. And then your question is, well, in this scenario, the dollars are the lira. What am I going to swap those for?
Exactly right. Yeah. One of in a presentation that I like to give, I show the devaluation of the lira versus the devaluation of the dollar. It's the exact same chart. The only variable is time. So the dollar is over 100 years, the lira is over two. So let's dive into that. So you mentioned lies, and I'd like you to elaborate what you mean by that. Thinking of the audience, so we're thinking of financial advisors, wealth managers, accountants. What are some of those lies that barefaced lies that we've been told and that we build into our businesses that are actually incorrect?
Okay. Well, I mean, if I drilled into all of them, we'd probably be here for a week. People probably have a list in their mind about, especially the lies we've been told over the last 5 years, and it's becoming much easier these days to establish for yourself what is a lie and what is not a lie, because of the access to real time information from various sources. You don't just have to listen to what comes out of the box in your living room. But specifically, the biggest lie of all is
Hey team, a very quick pause. If you're a financial advisor, wealth manager, or accountant, there's a very good chance your clients have already asked you about Bitcoin. And if they haven't, they soon will. That's why I've created 2 free downloads to help you feel confident and informed and ready to have professional conversations with your clients about this new emerging asset class. Head over to thebitcoinifa.com to get 1, the 8 reasons you need Bitcoin in your personal and professional portfolios, and 2, the Bitcoin cheat sheet, a concise, jargon-free guide designed to help you go from zero to confident and knowledgeable in under 10 minutes. Whether you're Bitcoin curious or Bitcoin cautious, these resources will help you speak with clarity and confidence. It takes less than 60 seconds. Again, that's thebitcoinifa.com and enter your email address to get your hands on these free resources today. Now, back to the episode.
I I mean, it is. I wouldn't really frame it as a lie, right? We have this. There's a theft that underpins absolutely everything that is treated as normal, but it is the is corroding everything. And so you could probably frame it as a lie, and probably the lie would be like your money is real. Um, Yeah, maybe that's the best way to frame it. The lie is your money is real, but the money that we use is not real. It's not even money.
Can you elaborate on that?
So we are in a situation where at the center of everything there is a big, in effect, a big red button. And this big red button allows the government, brackets central bank, to print as much money as it wants whenever it wants. Now there's a big abstraction there, and they do it via a combination of different methods of ever increasing complexity and obfuscation, so that the everyday person just thinks this is normal or some technical thing that they don't need to know about and don't need to understand. But its root is just money printing. The central bank and government can print money for free that you have to work for. And any scenario where you are forced to do something to earn something that someone else can create for free, that's fundamentally unfair. That's unjust. That's theft. That's theft of your time and energy. And this is baked into the very heart of the financial system. And it sweeps outwards and corrupts everything. And it manifests itself in inflation. And then everything else is just downstream of that. All the negative things that we see in our lives today either exist solely or primarily because of this. And for the ones that share other root causes, this just puts those things on steroids. And for anybody who hasn't seen What's the Problem, the video, please watch it. Like, pause the interview now. Pause the interview now. Go and watch that, and then come back, because it will put a sort of skeletal mental framework around why that is the case. But so we're in a situation now where this is baked so deeply into the heart of the system that people don't know anything else. And it's like being a fish in a fishbowl. Like, you never really question what's water, right? Because you're in it. You're in it. Look, there is no external frame of reference for questioning the existence of the water. And we are led to believe constantly by economics, how we are taught economics, Keynesian economics, what we hear from the media, that inflation is some combination of this mystery force that comes from somewhere that's beyond anyone's immediate. Well, certainly nobody's causing it deliberately, or the government or the central bank are not causing it deliberately.
It just happens, right?
It just
magically
happens.
appears.
It just happens, but at the same time, it's good. It's good. We need a bit of inflation. These are the secondary lies that are told to us. And so, if anybody watching was given the option about whether you personally could have a big red button that allowed you to print as much money as possible or not, you would take it. If having that big red button, if you had the monopoly on violence in a state and you had the big red button, you would ensure that the conversation was never around you having the big red button.
Can you dive into what you mean by the monopoly of violence?
Monopoly on violence. Any point through history, the person who collects the taxes has the monopoly on violence in the state.
Give me money, or you're going to jail, essentially.
Yeah, and so violence, I don't mean beat you up, although that the state has killed more people than anything else, right, in history, and will continue to do so. But it's violence in the broadest possible sense, like the corruption of private property rights, the state over the individual's rights, forcing you to do something, or and if you don't do it, you get punished in some way with no ability to opt out. That's coercion. That's violence against an individual. And so if you control the money printer, if you have the big red button that no one else has, you're going to use it. There'll always be an excuse to use it, a politically driven excuse to use it. And that accrues benefit to you, it accrues power to you because you are stealing the productivity and the purchasing power of everybody else in society.
How does it do that? How does it steal their productivity?
Yeah, so when you if we had a society where we had a fixed amount of money, and we can also draw the distinction here between money and currency down, but let's leave that aside. Let's leave that aside for now. We had a fixed amount of money that was effectively infinitely divisible, and then in that scenario, the natural effect, you've effectively got perfect money. So let's term it as perfect money. And I just briefly run through the characteristics of that. So it's like, it's absolute scarce. Nobody can create anymore. It's portable. It's infinitely divisible, effectively. It can travel at the speed of light. You hold it yourself. So nobody has to hold it on your behalf. It's censorship resistant, so nobody can stop you sending or receiving. It's acceptable by anybody anywhere. And all the units are exactly the same. That's perfect money. It's incorruptible money. And if people are acting in an economic way, and I'll link it back to what's the problem in the video, because the video is set on an island where people get washed ashore, but they're from a advanced civilization, and they can create whatever monetary technology they want, which is sort of, you have to suspend your disbelief. But they're starting from scratch in rebuilding society, and to begin with, everyone's just trying to survive. Like, they have nothing, and so everybody is trying to hunt their own food, doing their own fishing, cutting down their own trees for firewood and building materials, and then building their own houses. Like, super inefficient. Everyone's doing a bit of everything and just scratching a living. There's very little excess. So you have this perfect money, but you don't really use it because you never have any excess to trade with anybody. You're just sort of limping along. But then people start to specialize, because some people are better at fishing, some people are better at cutting down trees, some people are better at building houses. And when you specialize, it's a combination of efficiency and quality. And so the fisherman now catches twice the amount of fish in half the time, and the same for the tree cutter. And now suddenly everyone has to trade with each other to get the goods they want, because you can't build a house out of fish. You can't eat wood. Right? So you have to trade with each other. So you start getting exchange of value in this perfect money, and you have excess goods and excess time. So when you have excess goods, the price starts to fall, especially when you get lots of fishermen, lots of people cutting down the trees, lots of people building houses. You're in competition with one another. So in a free market with perfect money, prices begin to fall and quality goes up.
Has there ever been a time that has actually happened?
Yeah, I mean, the US in the 1800s.
Why was
I
that?
mean, so very little state interaction. The state is the disease here. You had largely free markets in the 1800s, massive expansion in the US, still using gold, gold
They were
backed
using
gold
a
backed paper.
scarce
Hard,
currency.
scarce currency. Prices gradually fell over 100 years, which just seems ridiculous today. Average, I don't know, I haven't seen the chart in a long time. It's probably 0.5% a year or so, 1% a year, something like that. And that's because the free market, through its combination of specialization, competition, and innovation and investment, that gets freed up because people then have excess time and excess capital because of the improvements in their processes. They can further invest in productivity and things. Drives prices down and quality up. This is just what happens when you leave people alone. Like, we all know this to be true. Like, if we're on the desert island, we'd do exactly the same and the outcome would be the same. So, capitalism, free market capitalism is not even an ism. It's just what happens when you don't interfere with people. And so those prices going down raises the quality of life for everybody. Because if you have some savings, it buys more next year than it does this year, not the way that we see it today. So we see prices going up constantly and quality deteriorating. Whereas the natural state of the world is prices falling and quality going up. So something is wrong. Something is wrong. And this is what I mean by the theft of the productivity. So the productivity driven from the free market should accrue to the population through increased purchasing power over time as they see the benefits of technology. Not only is the quality going up, the prices are coming down. So you're buying better goods at a cheaper rate tomorrow. It just raises the quality of life for everybody.
And I actually, so I saw this firsthand in Lebanon while I lived there during the currency crisis, which was everyone essentially had two jobs, which was their day-to-day job. And then the second they were paid, they became a trader. So their second job was to immediately trade the lira that they were paid in, $2, and then go and buy everything they needed because the prices literally tomorrow are going to be higher. And I feel like in the West, we have the same we have that same problem. It's just not as pronounced. So we know that if we want to buy something, if the kettle looks like it's about to break, it's 3 years old, looks like it's about to break, you'll think, oh, I'll just replace it today because I can't wait 6 months for a year for it to actually break. The price will be higher.
Yeah. And so what does that mean about your decision making?
It becomes a very short term.
It
Live
corrupts your
for
decision
today.
making. And you just picked one single economic decision there. But if you think about the implications of that underlying process of inflation, it corrupts every decision that you make, financial or otherwise. Because the vast majority of decisions that you make in your life have some tie to money in some way. The career you choose, when you choose to have children, if you choose to buy a house, rent, the holidays that you take, it's almost impossible to find something where money doesn't play at least a small role in the decision. And so if it's corrupted on the most fundamental level, what does that mean about your decision making? It's fundamentally corrupted. And how can that be a good thing? And when you have so what should happen as prices fall and as quality goes up? One of the pushbacks would be like, well, people would stop spending, they wouldn't spend anything, the economy would crash. I mean, that's just nonsense. Absolutely nonsense. And I'll give you two examples of why that's nonsense, right? Which we see today, right? The first is like, do you have a laptop? Do you have a big screen TV? Yes. Right. Did you, when you were going to buy those, think, well, if I wait a year, I can buy a laptop that's twice as good for the same price? Or I can buy this laptop for 30% less. Or I can buy a TV screen that's 20% thinner or 30% less for the same amount. You didn't. You absolutely didn't. You absolutely didn't, because there are still some segments of the economy where the rate of innovation and the rate of productivity far outstrips the rate of money printing. And consumer electronics is one of them. Because of Moore's law and the advancements in technology, it can overcome the 8 to 10% a year of money printing that we see. Most things can't. Right? So even if you just consider that subsector, we're not all sat at home reading books in the evening with no TVs and no no laptops, right? So the we won't spend does not hold water. That's the first example. The second example is credit card usage. Right. So right now people would put money on the credit card and roll over a balance and pay like 20% interest. By doing that, you're effectively saying I'm willing to pay more today for the same thing that I would pay in a month's time. Because if I waited a month to buy it, I'd be paying less for it because I'm not carrying the 20% interest month over month. And so it just doesn't hold any water at all. What would happen is the quality of spending would go up. And so if you have a money where the purchasing power increases month over month or year over year, when you're thinking about the kettle, you don't feel like you're forced into making a purchase when you wouldn't have made a purchase. You try to make it last longer. You replace it when it actually breaks. And then when you're spending money, you're questioning the quality of that spend at every transaction. Do I really need this thing? Is it going to add value to my life? Or is this investment going to drive a level of return that's going to be greater than the productivity increase accruing to the money naturally? Right? And so your quality of investments goes up, your quality of consumer product decision making, spending goes up, right? Which at the margins would reduce spending in the short term.
It
But
also incentivizes saving, right?
incentivizes saving and productivity and growth is driven from saving, not consumer spending. It's not debt driven, it's equity driven through your savings. And so you would see a drop in spending in the short term, but the quality of that spending goes up. And so play that forward. If this year I make better decisions for spending, me and everyone else in society, and next year and the year after, you start to see the compounding benefits of doing that. And it doesn't take very long until the aggregate spending is now much higher than it was on the old track because of the wealth creation. And so Keynesian economics is just total nonsense. Total nonsense. The fact that you would need inflation to run and to drive spending in an economy, it's basically saying we need to steal from you every year to make sure that you spend. I mean, it justifies the theft that is at the heart of the financial system through the creation of the central banks. That's it. And so anybody at home thinking inflation is good or not knowing where inflation comes from, hopefully now has a very clear idea. It is and always is a monetary phenomenon. You print money, you get inflation. We've seen this. You get taught this in schools. It's like a very obvious thing. You create more of something, it becomes more plentiful. Things, when measured in that, cost more. It's just like basic,
Like to
basic stuff.
an analogy I like to use, and this comes back to actually the idea of the theft, which is if you and I are playing a game of Monopoly, but you're able to take money out of the bank whenever you want, and I can't.
Yeah.
A, that's unfair. I don't really want to play that game.
Yeah.
But if I'm forced to, what happens in the game is the price of all the properties on the board go through the roof. Except you're the only one that can afford to buy them, and you're the one that's driven the prices up, and you're the only one that can afford to buy them.
Yeah. And so what happens is because I think some people have this sort of disconnect, because when you look at history pre the internet age, to when money is printed, you see lots of banknotes, because that's what again, money, currency. We'll leave that aside. Money is represented through these banknotes, and so there's just paper everywhere, and the paper becomes worthless. And you see this in the socialist countries in like South America, like just these notes lying in bushes, and people don't even pick them up because it's not worth picking them up because they're worthless. Hyperinflation in Germany, wheelbarrows full of cash, etc. But if they'd had computers, they wouldn't have printed the notes. Right? It would have just been in a database somewhere. So you don't even see it. There's been a war on cash in this country to digitize everything, because it means it then has to go through centralized third parties. You can't take a slice of a transaction fee when I give you a banknote. There's nobody sat in the middle there. Right? But if you digitize it for everyone's convenience, then you can permanently take a perpetual slice out of every transaction by sitting in the middle. And so, our taught experience of money printing doesn't align with today, because it's just not visible. It's not visible unless you look for the consequences of it. And the consequences of it are all around us today, and they're not just monetary.
I really want to dig into those consequences. Before we do that, though,
Sure.
you mentioned something earlier, which I think most financial advisors, wealth managers, accountants, they're going to find shocking, which is, you mentioned inflation is actually 8 to 10%, whereas within our businesses, we're speaking to Mr. and Mrs. Client saying, hey, look, I'm investing you in a 60-40 portfolio. You're getting 7% return a year. Inflation is only 2%, or certainly the target is only 2%. And I'm taking 1. So you're getting 7, inflation takes 2, I take 1. Your wealth is growing at 4% a year. But you're saying that actually inflation is more like 8 to 10%. What do you mean by that?
If you're earning 4% a year on your money, you are becoming less wealthy. And the way to think about this is, to think about your own life. When you go to the shops, what do you think the rate of inflation really is year over year? And inflation takes several forms in the shops. Right? One is the prices go up. So the same product, exactly the same product, same size, quality, is now just more expensive. Price has gone up. That's like inflation in the simplest, the most visible terms. Price inflation. But sometimes the products just get smaller. It's the same price, same quality. It's now just 20% smaller.
Are you sure your hands just aren't getting bigger, Joe?
Yeah, but this happens. This happens, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that's still inflation. It's just less visible. It's like second order, because you're still paying the same. So it doesn't feel like you're paying any more. You're just getting less in return. But then there's the third one, which is the quality goes down. The product, same price, same size. It's just worse. Lower quality ingredients, etc., etc. That's still a form of inflation. It's just it's an opaque opaque price inflation via quality, which then impacts you in lots of ways. It makes you unhealthier. Right? It breaks sooner, so you have to buy it again. So you do have to spend more. You do have to spend more on that transaction. And so you've got very visible inflation, you've got sort of visible inflation, you've got hidden inflation. And we see this when we go to the shops. Everyone, I think, can recognize those things.
I've got a real world example for you. When it is with ice cream, right? I've always had cats. When I was younger, my cats couldn't get enough of the ice cream out of the tub. They wanted it. Now, put ice cream in front of them and they're like, that's not food. Like, there's no milk in that. I'm not interested.
Well, I've not heard something like that before, but that's a prime example. It's a prime example. So price is up, size down, quality down, some combination of those three. But I think people would also recognize that inflation is not 2 or 3%. consumer inflation is a lot higher. It's a lot higher and has been for years. Prime example, Dan. The context here is I asked Dad to push back this call by 15 minutes because I was tied up having, taking my dog to go and get trimmed, which I have to do every sort of 6 weeks or so at the rate that she grows. But she said, "Oh, sorry, the price has gone up." I was like, "What again?" Again, and it had gone up by 12%. And it's the second price increase this year, 12%. So for the central bank to tell us, the government to tell us that inflation is 2%, 3% is nonsense. We know, we know, we experience with our eyes and our ears something which is not consistent with that. And it's not consistent with that because it's the government and the central bank that measure the thing. If I allow you to mark your own homework, do you think your grade is going to go up or down? Right? It's
Oh,
only
yes.
going in one direction. And the way that the inflation metrics are constructed is that they are malleable. You can change the rules. If a product goes up in price, they remove it. They have a substitution rule. Well, if the price has gone up, they'll buy an alternative that has not gone up, so that will be included in the basket instead of the thing that's gone up. And there's a load of rules like this. So to say inflation is 2 to 3% is just nonsense. Absolute nonsense. And that's just consumer inflation. If you think about asset inflation, you see the same thing. So if you zoom out enough and you look at the cumulative returns from the stock market over the last 50 years, since 1971. 1971, when we came off the gold standard and we moved to a fiat money era where the government can print as much money as it likes. The cumulative returns on an annual basis are probably around 8%. If you normalize those back to divide that by the amount of fiat currency in existence, it's flat.
So essentially money printing finds its way into the stock market.
It finds its way into the stock market, but also it's the denominator in the equation. Oh, sorry, it's the numerator in the equation. Because go back to your Monopoly example. If you double the amount of money in the game, the natural price for all the houses is double what it was before. Same number of houses, twice as much. And therefore they all cost twice as much. The stock market has gone up 8% a year because the rate of money printing has been around 8% a year. And so when you measure it in the units you're printing, of course it's going to be worth more. But the real world purchasing power of that has remained unchanged. And so 8 to 10% is your wealth hurdle. If you are earning 4%, you are losing 6%. If you are not accruing value in excess of 8 to 10% a year compounded on your assets, you are becoming poorer. Is that your number is going up. If you look at your wealth as a number, it's going up every year, but the share of that of the overall wealth is going down.
That's a really good way of framing it. And I think that's one of the hurdles for people to get over. And that's taking it right back to the beginning. That's the penny drop moment, which is my house is going up in value. My positive equity is going up in value. I live in a £300,000 house. I owe 100,000. I've got 200 grand. And my pension's got 200 grand in it, and it's growing at 4% a year after inflation, and my financial advisor takes his fees. But if you visualize that as a circle for all of the wealth in the economy, the 200 from your house and your 200 from your pension, to use that and that example again. So your total 400,000 is going down as a percentage of the total circle, total bubble every year.
Yeah.
And that's what you mean by the theft. So even though the number goes up, the purchasing power is that theft, or the loss of the purchasing power versus everyone else in the economy, or not everyone else, those that are politically connected to the money printer, your purchasing power is going down.
Yeah, so there's two layers to the theft. One is the money printing in the first instance, and the second is the taxation that they get to bring to bear on the gains when measured in the thing they're printing.
Okay,
So if you buy the stock market, you spend £10,000 investing in shares, that doubles over, I don't know, 7 years. They'll tax you on it when you sell it. Right. They get to steal some of it back. And you say steal some of it back because the change in price has been driven from their actions, not from a change in the value of the stock market. If they weren't printing money, it wouldn't have changed. It would still be worth £10,000. And so you wouldn't have had a gain. You wouldn't have had a gain. And so it's you're measuring assets in a frame of reference that someone can change at a whim. And they do so repeatedly over time, which allows them to steal more of your assets because they get to say you made a gain and therefore you owe taxes on it as well. If you removed the big red button, the stock market wouldn't have gone up. And I say it wouldn't have gone up in aggregate because, well, it's shown when you normalize the stock market over 50 years versus the money printer, it hasn't moved, right? But this is also due to the money printer. So what happens when you have a big red button and you bring more money into existence? That money comes into existence primarily close to the government, the central bank in some way. For that to reach the rest of the economy, it works outwards from that point. It goes from the government or the banks to those connected to the banks or to the government. And this is why I would term like the politically connected. It doesn't quite mean politics in terms of, you're in the government. It's you are close enough to the money printer to take advantage of it.
So things like consulting firms for the NHS. Yeah, well, yeah. But
Yeah.
to try and sort of, so not the actual political class, not MPs themselves, but people that would be productive in society, but have actually decided to go and be productive for the government because that's where the money comes from.
Yeah. You get to charge a large amount. You're insulated from competition through regulation or whitelisting or political connections. And the quality of service you deliver is irrelevant. And so, but it's not just earning revenue, it's also the terms on which you can access fresh capital. So the closer you are to the government, the closer you are to the money printer, the better financing terms you get. You can borrow money more cheaply, which allows you to buy assets with a better risk reward to those people further away from the money printer. And when you're printing more money, those assets get driven up in value, as we've seen. So economically, it's better just to be attached to the money printer, be borrowing money and buying assets, rather than be further away and forced to borrow them at higher rates. So why does the consumer have to pay 5, 10, 20% on credit cards when the banks can get it for the overnight rate? It's layers of fees, reduced access to capital the further you are from the money printer. And so yeah, the printing of the money distorts the price signals as well, which is why the consulting firm in your example gets attracted to the government in the first place. So this fresh money reaches the outer ring to the big red button because that's how it comes into existence, how it reaches the rest of the economy. They then spend it with other firms, etc., and it gradually moves outwards. But it distorts all the price signals. So if you go back to our island example, where people are trading with one another with perfect money, and prices were falling because supply was going up and quality was going up, productivity was accruing to everybody. When the government spends that money in the economy, or the banks bring it into existence and lend it on preferential terms to those connected to them, that money didn't exist yesterday. So when those participants then spend the money elsewhere, it distorts the price signals of the areas of the economy that touches, because it looks like new demand. But it's just new money. It's not new demand. It's fake demand, because it's just extra money. And so you start to see price increases in certain areas of the economy. And then that's a signal to all the active capital and the rest of the market, all the entrepreneurs, that there is some sort of demand-supply imbalance here, an opportunity for profitability. So those consulting firms think, why am I trying to compete with all these other firms over there? I'll just go and try and get that government contract because it's massively fat. And so you end up corrupting the price signals in the free market and undermining the productivity that was accruing to everybody by bringing the most productive people closer to the government and away from adding productivity gains to the rest of the economy. And so you erode that natural productivity gains in sectors where there's where they are closer to the government, less subject to free market forces, the likes of technology, etc., etc. So it's not only are they printing money and driving inflation that way, they're negatively impacting the productivity gains we see anyway by distorting the free market. So they're stealing not just inflation at 10%, say, is not 10% theft, it's 13% theft. Because they've undermined or impaired the 3% a year productivity gains we should be seeing through the actions of the free market, and then printed money on top of that. And so it's not just theft, it is the biggest theft of all time and is perpetual. And people think that it's natural. They think that it's good because it's been told we need inflation. We do not need inflation. We do not need inflation. And so for the IFAs listening here, I would challenge you to question your frame of reference here. And it's a little bit tricky because the IFA model is carry, effectively. So this theft benefits IFAs, unfortunately. You guys are somewhat connected to the money printer. You are one of the beneficiaries of the money printer. That will not always be the case. There will be a time where the fiat system dies and the business model doesn't work anymore. And that time is coming. It may seem like a really out there statement for people listening who have not found Bitcoin yet. This is coming and it is inevitable because the hardest money wins and Bitcoin is the hardest money. Fiat will die. It's going to take years, but it will die. And so there is no neutral strategy with Bitcoin. If you ignore it, you lose.
Well, that's actually something I want to touch on there, Joe. So thank you for that. And yeah, I can understand that might be slightly disconcerting for the audience to hear.
I realise that's like being hit in the face with a frying pan. I'm not trying to upset or scare people, and this is not happening anytime soon. But I would represent it as an opportunity for everybody, not a threat. It is absolutely a threat, but it's a threat if you don't engage with it and understand what Bitcoin is, how it's going to change the world, and how you can use it yourself as a competitive advantage.
That's exactly the point I was going to touch on, which is that it is going to happen, whether it takes 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. You do give yourself a competitive advantage by learning about Bitcoin, being able to have adult professional conversations with clients about Bitcoin. And then there's obviously the asymmetric upsides of allocating a small percentage of assets under management to Bitcoin over the next few years. I mean, there's lots of stats that I use in my presentations about the effect of 1%, 5%, and 10% of Bitcoin on a portfolio over the last 10 years. And you will not be shocked to know, Joe, that it's, you know, there is incredible asymmetric upsides. So this is going to happen, and it will probably, you know, there's a phrase that we like to say in the Bitcoin community, which is gradually, then suddenly. So people will start to move smaller and small, and then sort of ever increasing amounts of their portfolios into Bitcoin, both self-sovereignty and paper Bitcoin through ETFs that are then also have self-sovereignty at the other end by the fund manager. And those that do will win in asymmetric ways versus those who don't. And obviously the IFAs that manage those portfolios on behalf of their clients are going to look amazing 5 to 10 years from now.
Yeah, they absolutely will. I mean, I'm very conscious of the regulatory boundaries that some people may feel unfairly inhibited by, and you can thank the FCA for protecting everybody. But having the conversations is an important one. You know, you are going to hopefully, I mean, it's my expectation, start to see more and more of your customers say, "Why haven't you told me about Bitcoin?" Because they're going to start to know about it. And the fact that you don't know about it, the fact that you have not been proactive with them about flagging the best performing asset class of the last 16 years and the next 16 years.
And fastest appreciating in history, I believe.
Yeah. You're going to, if you don't get ahead of it, you're not going to look good. You're just not, because your customers will be like, why is, I'm meant to be relying on this guy to give me advice and he's not talking to me about this thing. Like, even with the regulatory restrictions, educating your customers on what this is, on why it's important, why it's relevant, is still required because you position yourself well. It's about keeping the customer happy. It's like any business. If the customer feels like you've got a blind spot, they'll go and find somebody else.
Okay, there was something you touched on earlier, Joe, that I think we slightly skipped over, which was taxation being theft. And I wanted to just touch back on that because for a lot of people, and I would count myself in that camp to an extent, which is, you know, we need policemen, firemen. We obviously have a public funded health service, which, personal opinion, I think is one of the greatest things Britain's ever done. Where it's gotten to, I'm not so happy with. So those things aren't really going to be dealt with very well by the free market. So can you touch on what you mean by sort of taxation being theft? Are you an advocate for just removing all taxation?
I think there's a distinction to draw, and my comment was in the context of taxation on asset appreciation, when the asset appreciation is just because the frame of reference is being manipulated. You're being taxed on something on a value change when the value hasn't changed. That's theft.
I see. Okay.
That's theft. There's no other word for it. I move the goalposts and then I charge you because I moved the goalposts.
Yeah.
That's theft. Right? That's second order theft driven from inflation. Right? Now that's very different. That's very different from saying all taxation is theft. And everybody listening will be somewhere on the spectrum. You know, nobody likes paying taxes. And at one end, if I paid 100% tax, I am a slave. If I don't get to keep anything I work for, I'm a slave. Right? At 99%, I'm probably still a slave. So at some point on that spectrum, you go from being a slave to not a slave. And everyone's perception of where that break even is different. And so what I'm not saying is all taxation is theft. Most of taxation is theft. And it's theft because it's not opt-out and there's no accountability. Now, all governments are terrible because there's no accountability. All governments are terrible because they have access to the big red button and they have a monopoly on violence. If you take away the big red button, their ability to manipulate everybody drops dramatically because then they're subject to free market forces again. Your taxes raised need to match spending. And if you're spending too much, you get voted out. And you can't force people to pay. You can't print your way out of it. So you have to find a balance that works for the population, which naturally leads to lower government intervention and more free market. And the free market can solve almost everything. Almost everything. And so you could cut the government by 90% and everything would be better. You cut taxes. Taxes drive spending. There is no. I mean, just think about what taxation is. Taxation is taking money out of the hands of people who have delivered value to someone else, and the core representation of those is, there's no taxation without business. People create businesses. People create innovation, investment, productivity. They create value. And the people who create the most value, generally speaking, obviously there are exceptions, etc., generally speaking, earn more than people who create less value. This is just free markets. And so over time, capital accumulates to the people who are good at creating value. That's like the natural evolution of free markets. And then you think, as a government, I can take capital out of the hands of efficient capital allocators who've been shown to be efficient capital allocators because they've accumulated capital, and then allocate it inefficiently. So I'll take it out the hands of efficient capital allocators, allocate it inefficiently, and you think that's going to grow an economy. It's so obviously wrong. It's so obviously wrong as to be laughable. And so, yeah, low taxes, free market, protection of private property, sovereignty for the individuals is what drives quality of life increase for everybody, not what we have today. Now, you can argue of where you draw the line in terms of that low taxation, like what services should be centralized, what services should not be centralized, with defense, police, judiciary, all of these things. Different people would have different views on that. And I'm not saying one is right, one is wrong. If get 100 people in a room, you'll have 100 different opinions. But it's more about the fundamentals of the government does not drive growth, does not drive innovation. They get in the way. They get in the way.
I think the taxation that really is theft and really grinds my gears is the percentage of tax that I pay that just goes towards paying off debt that the government has already accumulated from previous inefficiency. If everyone could actually see that, if they're paying £10,000 in tax and 2,000 of that every year is just paying off interest, is essentially paying off the government's credit card that they've carried month to month. And if you don't carry credit card debt month to month because you don't like paying interest, you would be furious if they actually showed you that.
Because they have the big red button. If you can print as much money as you want, you can borrow as much money as you want because you can always pay it back. Yeah. You can. there's no way the UK can go bankrupt, technically, because they can always meet their obligations nominally. Our borrowing is nominal borrowing. We owe X billion pounds. It doesn't mean what we don't owe is X billion. We don't owe purchasing power. We owe pounds, and we can print the pounds, so we can always meet our obligations. But when we do that, we destroy the currency. We destroy the purchasing power of the pounds. And so this is the heart of the whole thing. Like we have a debt-based economy where we issue debt and we print money to drive consumer spending. That accrues interest. We run deficits. So when the debt comes due, we have to issue more debt with more interest. The amount of pounds in existence only goes up. And whenever anything happens, the central bank and the government print more money to paper over the cracks of the banking sector, or because of COVID or whatever. The excuse is a range of things, and there'll always be an excuse to just print more money. And to go back to your comment around the charts for Lebanon versus the UK in terms of the money printing, they're all just the same, just a different timescale. And so yeah, of course I would just borrow as much as I can in the thing I can print. Yeah, what's the downside? The downside is you destroy the currency and you steal the purchasing power from the population until everyone is impoverished. That's the outcome. And this is not new. This is not new. We've seen it 100 times before. It's just happening slowly. So, if you are thinking about trying to protect wealth, your hurdle rate has to be over the rate of money printing, 8 to 10% a year after tax. Right, try doing that.
And advisor fees.
And advisor fees. And it needs to be beyond the reach of the state. Because play this forward, the rate of money printing is not slowing. The purchasing power of fiat currency is going to zero. It's going to zero because there's no cap on the amount of pounds that will be printed in time. So what happens in that scenario is the pound becomes increasingly worthless. The government has to find ever more creative ways of trying to recoup assets. And they do that through taxation. They do that through asset seizures. They do that through further restrictions of the free market, etc., further interference in every aspect of our life. And so you've got to own something they can't take. They can take your house, they can take your shares, they can take that 200,000 pension pot at the stroke of a pen, and they will. They will. To think that most people will actually be able to access their pensions is ludicrous. If they do, it will be after a massive tax penalty, and what you're left with will buy almost nothing because the purchasing power is being destroyed.
Yeah, so even if they don't tax it, they're not going to grow as fast as to protect your retirement. You're not going to be able to live a comfortable and dignified retirement on your £2 million pension pot because it doesn't buy anything.
Correct. And even when you do, you'll probably buy an annuity, and the annuity will pay you an annual rate, and that may be linked to inflation, but it's linked to inflation at 2 or 3%, not 10%. So it's going to get eroded anyway, even if you got it. But you're probably not going to get it because, before that happens, we're going to be in such a financial hole as a country. All fiat currencies are going to be in a financial hole. The government will say, we're all in it together. Everyone's taking a haircut on their pensions. I just don't think you're ever going to. Anybody out there thinking, I'm retiring in 30 years or 20 years and I'm going to have a pension? I'd be thinking about plan B. Plan B, because the direction of travel is not a good one. I'm not trying to scare people. I'm just trying to help them zoom out and see what's actually happening. Because when things change by small percentages every year, it doesn't feel like a lot, but they compound very quickly. And this isn't a new story. And so you have to have something where you can outperform that debasement of the currency. And you have to have something you can actually control, that you actually own. And the only thing you can actually own is Bitcoin. They can take your house, they take your pension pot, they can change the tax rates, they can do whatever, they can't take your Bitcoin. You'd have to give it to them. It's information.
So look, let's touch on Bitcoin. I'm a bit wary of time. We've probably got
Okay,
another
we go for a
10,
while.
15, 20 minutes. But you know, the great thing about What's the Problem is that it's an excellent on-ramp. It's a great way for people to learn about, this sort of hidden insidious problem that we're not aware of, that we have been lied to. It can leave people feeling a bit scary, right? But there is the solution. So let's move on to that. I you know I'm an eternal optimist. So what does moving to something like a Bitcoin standard solve? Or how is what I'm trying to get at is, how is Bitcoin positive? We've spent an hour talking about perhaps the negatives. Let's talk about the positives.
Well, I think we're both positive, Dan, and in part because because of Bitcoin.
Hey team, just a quick pause to say a huge thank you. You've given us your most precious assets, your time and your attention. And honestly, it means the world to us. If you've enjoyed this episode or you take value from these conversations, it would really mean a lot if you could like, comment, or subscribe. Those things really help the algorithm and they help the channel to grow. And if there's someone in your life who would take value from this, maybe a fellow advisor or someone just curious about Bitcoin, please send it their way. You never know what it might spark. Okay, back to the studio.
We were both at a Bitcoin conference a few weeks ago, and 500 Bitcoiners. There was nothing but positivity. But it's not about the price. It's because what Bitcoin represents. Bitcoin represents this civilizational change for humanity, the likes of which we've never seen, because it's a technological innovation slash discovery of absolute scarcity in digital form, which gives us a path to a money beyond state control. It's a free market money, and I mean money and currency, not money separated from bits of paper that then represent money, which is where we are today, the fiat world. But Bitcoin is one and the same, and it returns self-sovereignty to every individual. It gives you solid foundations to plan for the future. I'm not worried about not having it. Nobody can take it off me. My decision making is improved because now that I think about Bitcoin, I see prices going down over time when measured in Bitcoin. And so to come back to your kettle example, you're not buying a kettle in Bitcoin today. You're going to put it off as long as possible, right? Because otherwise the kettle costs you more. It doesn't
I
mean
shared a recent example of the price of the average UK home in Bitcoin. So in 2016, it was 400 and something. 2020, it was 20 something. And in 2024, it was 5.
there's two effects going on with Bitcoin. It is not yet a fully adopted money. So on the within What's the Problem, you're assuming it's the only money in existence, and it represents the cumulative wealth of everybody. And that's when you see the productivity gains accruing to the money. It becomes more valuable itself over time. And we're not at that stage yet because the penetration of Bitcoin as a percentage of the global wealth base is so small. But there will be a time where we will get to that. And so, a lot of that change in the house price is due to the monetization of Bitcoin gradually over time. But Bitcoin gives you solid foundations, and it changes the way that you think about the world. It extends out the time frame that you consider making decisions for, that you plan for yourself. It is the only route out of insolvency for the world. And again, this is going to seem borderline ridiculous probably to some of the people listening, because they can't necessarily connect the dots yet. But with Bitcoin, it is absolute scarcity. We have the only other absolutely scarce asset is time. And that's only when measured by the individual, right? Because we die. That's the only thing. Time is also infinite. Right? Bitcoin is the only absolute scarce thing. You cannot print any more of it. It already exists. Already all exists. But some of it just hasn't. Well, I mean, it's sort of great. It's slightly esoteric. Anyway, there's 21 million, and each Bitcoin is separated to 100 million satoshis. In the same way that $1 is 100 cents, but it's 1 to 100 million. And so people may be thinking, well, I can't afford a Bitcoin. It's like $90,000 or $95,000. Divided by 100 million, you can get 1,000 sats for $1. And so there is, it's accessible to everybody. But the key thing about the absolute scarcity is when demand goes up, supply cannot go up. Unlike absolutely anything else in the world, if the price of anything in the world goes up materially, people will find ways of supplying more of it. And that will make the price go back down. Or will stop the price going up as the free market, what's left of the free market, begins to take effect. Bitcoin, this is just not the case. It has a fixed monetary policy for the next 120 years, regardless of what happens. And so there's zero elasticity in the new supply of Bitcoin over that period of time. And so it's unlike anything we've ever seen before. And one of the things people perhaps struggle with Bitcoin is to think, well, it's not backed by anything. And to that, I'd say two things. Firstly, the monopoly money that you use at the moment is absolutely not backed by anything other than violence. You're mandated to use it and pay taxes in it, not because it itself has value. It's because that's just the way we're told to keep score. And if you don't, you end up in a cell or worse. But for Bitcoin, it's absolutely backed by something. It's backed by energy. It's backed by the purest form of energy, in the same way that gold is backed by energy, just really inefficiently. Gold comes into existence above the earth because somebody expended energy getting it out the earth. It's a proxy for energy money. You can't create any more unless you expend a lot of energy. And the limited supply of gold and the other qualities of gold make it a historic store of value. People couldn't print it. They can make more of it through expending energy. This is exactly what Bitcoin is, apart from it has a cap. And so instead of spending energy really inefficiently on trucks and destroying the planet and getting gold out the ground, you just expend electrical energy to bring Bitcoin into existence. But it's through a competitive free market process. And so Bitcoin is just energy money. It's absolutely backed by something. It's backed by energy. is the purest, highest quality form of money we've ever had, and it's fixed in supply. And there is nothing. It is the apex. There's just nothing beyond it. So you've got the discovery of absolute digital scarcity, backed by the purest form of backing there is, which is raw energy. I mean, it's astounding, but it's hard to make the connections. And then, sorry, I'm going off on one here, Dan, but
Yeah.
the next question would be, I would imagine some people are thinking, but can't you just copy it? Why just go and create a Bitcoin too? Is it? Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can. It's open source. It's open source for everybody. You can go and copy it today. Called Dancoin. Exactly, it looks like Bitcoin, 21 million, etc. So why is Bitcoin valuable? If you go and do that today, you're the only person running Dancoin. You might be mining. Someone with a bigger computer comes along and corrupts your network. They can change the rules. They can change the history. No one else accepts Dancoin. Whereas, and this is why Bitcoin is such the gradual process, because it's entirely opt-in. And the more people that opt in and join the network, it strengthens the network. And the more people that strengthen the network attracts more people that strengthen the network. This isn't a Ponzi scheme. This is perfect money. That's an optional for everybody. And the logic is to join, because it's beyond state control. And so over time, the Bitcoin network just becomes more and more secure. And the more secure it becomes, the more valuable it is. Because more people are going to join it, make it even more secure. And so it's the discovery of absolute digital scarcity encased in a wall of energy. And that wall of energy is now so big, it's beyond the reach of any combination of nation states to corrupt it. And it's growing all the time. And the logical thing is to join. The whole network is everybody working in their own absolute self-interest, but it's to the benefit of everyone else. It is the epitome of the free market. Free market forces creating a system which is anti-fragile and just becomes a black hole, a gravitational black hole that just consumes everything, because the logical thing is just to join it. Because you can't fight it. If you fight it, you lose. So where's the competitive advantage? The advantage is to join it. And to me, the outcome is clear. Everyone joins it. We're just very early. And beyond Bitcoin, there is nothing.
It's hard to improve on perfection.
Well, I mean, there's a statement that's certainly true. I think it takes time for people to connect the dots and to think non-linearly into the future about what is going to happen. But you need to think about incentive structures, human action, and what that logically must mean into the future. Which is not easy. Which is not easy, but I would encourage, we've covered a lot of ground in this conversation, and a lot of it will be new for the people listening. And I would encourage everyone to start afresh with Bitcoin. It is not what you think. So start afresh, watch what's the problem. After that, go to the website that I talk about at the end of the video, which has 5 more videos and half a dozen books that you can watch to get started with various different aspects of Bitcoin. I absolutely don't want people to buy Bitcoin. And none of what we've talked about is financial advice in any way. All I want people to do is learn about Bitcoin. Don't be like me or Dan and reject it the first few times you hear it because you didn't put any effort in. Start with a blank sheet of paper, put a small amount of effort in by watching these videos. And then decide for yourself. If you still think it's pointless spending any more time, fine, don't. Maybe it's not the right time for you. But I'd say there's a good proportion of people watching will watch those videos and go, okay, maybe there is something here. And, it's a good indicator. I mean, again, back to that conference, Dan, that we went to. People sometimes think about Bitcoin as being a cult, because people become so fervent in their advocacy of it. People then go, well, okay, they must have some ulterior motive. Bitcoin is the only cult in the world where you are actively encouraged not to trust anybody and to think for yourself. Right? You don't trust, you verify. You verify. And every conversation you had at that event, Dan, I would bet was with a high quality person. Right? Somebody who's come from a different background. Everyone comes from different backgrounds, but they've gone through a very similar chain of thinking, a chain of logic, chain of critical thinking that's landed them at the position of, yeah, Bitcoin's going to fix the world. Right? And so the path is there for people. You just need to put a small amount of effort in to get going. And once you get going, I'll bet my boots as to where you're going to end up. Right? But make your own decisions. Don't listen to Dan and I. Just do your own work.
Completely agree with that, Joe. The only other example I give of perfectly scarce assets is fine art by deceased artists.
Yeah,
because
I mean,
it's
fair
scarce.
enough, fair.
But but the very wealthy cottoned onto that a long time ago. Very few of us, I'm not one of them, are buying £50 million Rembrandts. But I do have I have set up what is called a dollar cost average or a pound cost average solution through an app. I use an app called Strike. And at the moment, I'm buying £1 a day of Bitcoin. That's it. It's that simple. You can buy the tiniest amount of it as a hedge against all of the things that we've spoken about today. Joe, we always like to close the show with what is one positive thing that Bitcoin has brought to your life outside of number go up.
Hope. Hope brackets expectation. And I say expectation because hope suggests an outcome which is in question. This isn't in question for me. The only variables are how long it takes and the path in which we follow. But the outcome is clear to me. So where we end up. And Bitcoin is very optimistic for the future. Because think about how we would think about the world if Bitcoin didn't exist. If we were trapped in this system, and it's going to zero, the purchasing power is going to zero, and all your assets are going to get taken over time, how you would feel. So when you know that's not going to happen, well, that's going to happen, but there is a lifeboat.
Great answer. Thank you, Joe.
Okay, well, thanks very much for having me, Dan. I've really enjoyed it.
No worries. And one last thing, actually, if anyone wants to get hold of you or follow you, where can they?
I'm on exit at satmojoe, SATMOJOEN. Maybe you'll see it on the screen, I'm not sure. And the video is What's the Problem? You can find it on what'stheproblem.org or on satsversusfiat.com, SATSVSFIAT.com. And that's the same website, same X handle, same YouTube, or just Google What's the Problem, and it'll be one of the videos that pops up with a Pixar type person on the front called Fiatello. Please watch it. Even if you disagree with absolutely everything I've said today, please just watch it. And then tell me why you disagree, and we can have a chat about it. If you watch it and it makes sense, please share it with somebody. Share it with someone else. Because the only way... I know where we're going to end up, but I want to see as many people get there as possible in the shortest amount of time. That does not mean buying Bitcoin. It means just learn about Bitcoin and make your own decisions about what comes next.
And yeah, as ever, there will be a link to the video in the show notes as well.
Great.
Joe, thank you so much. Enjoy your day.
All right. Thanks, Lev.